Us as coaches, strength coaches, athletic trainers, we're sometimes asked by our athletes what we can do to just get better, or how can we heal faster from our injuries. I usually start that conversation by asking 3 questions. The first is, what is your nutrition like? What type of food are you putting in your body? How often are you eating? Secondly, hydration. How much water are you drinking throughout the day? And then finally, how are you sleeping? What time at night are you going to bed? How many hours are you sleeping during the night? All 3 of those things are going to help with your sports performance. Today we have McKenna Welsh-Hands, a nutritionist from LGH Sports Medicine, with us to speak with us on the nutrition aspect of sports performance. She's going to talk to you about what to fuel your body with before, during, and after exercises. So we're going to start with a presentation, and then we will have a question and answer session right after the presentation. Thank you, McKenna, for coming to talk to our athletes today. Let's please give her a warm Warwick welcome.
Hey everyone, thank you Sheila for the intro, I appreciate that. Like she said, my name is McKenna, and I have worked for Lancaster General for 4 years, and I also work for Messiah University as their campus dietitian, and I do some teaching there as well. And I also am an athlete. I've played soccer, I ran track in college, and now I do Ironman triathlons, so I've dabbled in some different things with different distances. Different types of training, anywhere from strength and power to team sports to ultra endurance. So it's been really fun to just test that out in my own athletic career. And I'm excited to talk to each of you tonight, or this afternoon rather, about some fueling principles that I've learned and that I've practiced myself. And my goal is to just give you some tools that you can practice with as well. You all are at an age where you are building a really solid foundation for yourself as you start to work toward adulthood. And so a lot of the things that I talk about this afternoon are going to be really the building blocks. I get a lot of questions about like post-workout supplements and different products like that. And there's a time and a place for those things, but generally they're the cherry on top. And at your age, it's generally discouraged to be focusing on those things. So I'll spend a lot more time on just eating food, and understanding how different foods impact our body and our health and our performance and our well-being, and some hydration as well, because that's really important. So to go a little bit more specifically into what we'll cover today, I want to talk through the 3 macronutrients, which are the 3 types of energy we get from food, and have a general understanding of which foods have which macronutrients, and how do I balance that throughout the day, and how does that apply to what I put on my plate. Comparing maybe a hard practice day to an off day. How do I want to make my plate a little bit different depending on how active I am that day? And we'll also talk about some micronutrients, which are vitamins and minerals, and a short list of those that I often see are deficient in athletes, and how to prevent that from happening or keep track of that. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about hydration. I will say that as much as I enjoy talking to a group, I also really, really appreciate dialogue. It's a little bit challenging to do in this setting, but we'll be sure to talk. I'll be sure to give time for questions at the end. So if you have anything, please feel free to shout it out. I don't bite. I love having a conversation with people. So just be thinking of things throughout the talk tonight, and if you come up with anything, don't hesitate to shout it out. So briefly, I want to talk about why do we worry about nutrition? And like I said at the beginning, it's very much the building block to a lot of aspects of our life. What we fuel our body with or don't fuel our body with has a very strong impact on many aspects of how our bodies function. And a few things that good nutrition can help with are to just boost our immunity, prevent us from getting sick, help us to heal more quickly from different illnesses that we get, be able to just maintain health measures like regulating our blood sugar and our blood pressure and our cholesterol and all these things that we don't often think about when we're young, but they really, being able to start from a young age building a balanced diet can help improve these things, especially later in life. Food has a big impact on how well our GI system, our stomach, and our intestines function. And so as athletes, no doubt at some point you've dealt with nausea or cramping or even diarrhea. I know that probably sounds like TMI, but as a dietitian, I talk about that a lot with people. But at some point, if you haven't experienced that yet, you probably will in different parts of your training. And so foods have a big impact on that too. So that's just another reason that nutrition is an important thing to discuss. It obviously has the ability to prevent and even heal injury and maximize our workouts. When we have enough fuel in the system, we can really push our hardest and give our best. Nutrition there are many ways to do it well. A lot of us want a quick, easy, black and white answer, and in some ways I can provide that, but nutrition can look different for everyone. And what this graphic shows is that there are a lot of different things that influence what our bodies need each day, anywhere from just our basal metabolic rate, all the systems that are functioning in our body all the time that keep us alive. That makes up the majority of the energy needs that we have, but even the types of foods that we eat can impact how much energy we need. Protein takes a lot of energy for our body to digest. So when we have a high protein diet, we actually burn more calories. And even like if you're a fidgeter or if it's cold out and you're shivering, that can impact how many calories you use in a day. And then obviously your level of training and your physical activity has an impact on that too. So there are a lot of things that we look at, or I look at when I sit down with someone to try to determine about how much they might need. We're going to jump into the macros, and like I said earlier, that term basically means nutrients that we need in large amounts because they are what provide energy for our bodies, and there are three main ones that we look at from food: carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And what this figure is showing is that there's some overlap. There are a lot of foods that have some amount of all three, and we need all three pretty consistently throughout the day. There are a lot of trendy diets out there that are very confusing, but people follow them because they don't really know any better. And one in particular that I'm thinking of right now is called the ketogenic diet or the keto diet that really tries to cut out carbohydrates. And as young growing athletes, you guys are carb burning machines. So I can assure you that carbohydrates are not something to be avoided. They are your best friend in terms of performance and preventing injury and well-being. So I kind of want to stress that, like when you hear something out there that's kind of extreme, trying to cut out a full food group or an entire energy group, that should raise a red flag in your mind, because in general, I come from the mindset that all food offers value in the appropriate context. You can't come to me with any one food that I'll say, oh, don't ever eat that again, that's terrible for you. So in that way, I really try to encourage avoiding an all or nothing approach toward food or a black and white view toward food as either good or bad. Every food has something to offer for us. I often use the example of ice cream because even as a dietitian, I am known in my friend group as the one who brings homemade ice cream to the gatherings. I eat dessert too. I love dessert. So ice cream happens to be a really good potassium source for our bodies, and most of us don't get enough potassium in our diet. Sure, ice cream has a lot of sugar in it, so if we eat tons of it, we're not going to feel great, So it has a place in our diet in the appropriate amount and context to help our bodies feel good. Because I'm getting on a tangent that I'm about to get off of, but before I get off of it, I'll say one more thing. Food, there are different types of nourishment. We're always super focused on what's the healthiest option, What's going to make me feel the best? And of course, that's really important. We want to get a balance of nutrients into our body so that our bodies can function their best. But there's also emotional nourishment from food too. We have fun eating ice cream, or whatever it is your fun food is. That enhances our quality of life. That's a different type of health that we often don't think about. So that's another reason I'm not on that bandwagon of like, oh, only fruits and vegetables, or only, the good foods. So anyways, that is a whole different conversation. And I want to stay focused on kind of helping you wrap your minds around what is balanced nutrition, what does that look like, and how do I fuel my body well for the sports that I'm pursuing. So back to the macronutrients. There's a lot of overlap. Many foods contain some of all three, but they're usually a lot higher in one or maybe two, and so they'll get lumped into categories. As much as we can't be totally black and white about food, black and white does simplify things, and so I will, even though many foods have some amount of all three of these, I will try to separate them out into, okay, what are the most carbohydrate-rich foods versus the most protein-rich foods and fat? And I'm sure some of this information today is stuff that you've heard, but I want to bring clarity and bring confidence in what you know about nutrition at the same time. And I'm sure there will be some new information too. But yeah, so we're going to jump first into carbohydrates. Like I said, as an athlete, they're some of your best friends. And some of the main carbohydrate sources in our diet are going to be from grain-based foods. And a lot of times, when I'm working one-on-one with people, I'll quiz them and say, what is the first food that comes to mind when I say the word carb? 99% of the time, people's first answer is bread. We've been trained in our society to think of bread as a carb. And that's because bread comes from a grain, right? And pasta and rice and cereal. Things like pretzels and stuff too. Anything that comes from a grain is going to be primarily carbohydrate. You could also say that of most vegetables too, especially the starchy vegetables or the root vegetables like potatoes and carrots, or the seed-like vegetables like corn and peas. Those are all very carbohydrate-rich foods. Some types of dairy, like milk, is a good carbohydrate source. And yogurt, especially if it's been sweetened, it would be a significant source of carbohydrate too. And what our body uses carbohydrate for a lot of different things, but two of the primary things that our bodies use carb for are for our working muscles and our brain, which as student athletes applies to on multiple levels. So carbohydrates are important to have in the system when you're headed to school to learn, but then also when you're headed out to the field or to the court to practice. At the bottom of the screen here, it says portion size. I'm going to get into that in a little bit. Did I skip over? I think I skipped over fruit. Fruit is also a carbohydrate source too. I do want to take a minute and talk about complex versus simple carbohydrates because there's a lot of confusion around that. So carbohydrate is that umbrella term of that's the macronutrient. You have complex carbs under that and you have simple carbs or sugar. And we're going to just put our science brains on for a second. And if we looked at a complex carbohydrate and a simple carbohydrate or sugar under a microscope, sugar is just little individual molecules. You consume it, right away it's absorbed in your body and spikes your blood sugar. It's very quickly available energy, which if you're eating something right before a practice, that's perfect. We actually want more simple forms of carbohydrate going into our body when we're about to go practice. If you want something that's going to carry you for a few hours until your next meal or for a practice that's later in the afternoon, you would want to try to focus more on complex carbohydrate sources, which are going to come from more whole food options like whole grains and fruit and starchy veggies and stuff like that. The simple carbs you see a lot more in your processed foods and some fruits too. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, but I'll give some application to that in a little bit. Next one is protein. So when we think of protein, we often think of muscle, right? Because our muscles are made up of protein primarily. Protein does a lot of different things in the body, but it's mostly focused around building and repairing different cells throughout our body. So it's very, very important to get enough protein to help us recover and keep up with our training. Some of the best sources of protein are going to be the animal sources of protein, just because they are complete. There are building blocks to protein called amino acids, and animal sources of protein have all of the amino acids that we need in them. But plant sources are actually usually low in some of them, so it's a little bit harder. Vegetarian and vegan diets are a little bit harder to get enough protein on. It can be done. You just have to have a plan for yourself. But a lot of our protein sources are going to be, from our meats and our chicken and our fish and eggs and dairy, and you can find that in like your beans and nuts and seeds and stuff too. Really quick lesson on complete versus incomplete. So I said a minute ago about the amino acids. There are 9 essential amino acids. There are 20 that we know of altogether, but 9 of them cannot be made by our body. So we have to get them from our diet. And like I said, all animal sources of protein have all 9 in them, but plant sources of protein, some of them actually don't have all 9. And so, I don't know, like beans, that's a plant-based protein source. They might have 5 of the 9, and they're deficient in 4. But rice actually has the other 4. And so we have these combinations where when you have beans and rice together they form a complete protein. And so that's one of the ways that vegans can get enough protein in their diet, is by pairing those different sources. But when you hear the word an incomplete protein, that's what that means. You're missing some of those 9 essential amino acids. So I encourage people to focus on getting their, especially young athletes, to focus on getting their protein from animal sources, just because you can be confident that you're getting enough. Like I said, it can be done with plant-based eating, but it just takes a little bit more time and effort to do that. Last one is fat. So fat does a lot of different things. There are 4 vitamins that are called fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamins A, D, E, and K. And in order for our body to absorb them, we have to take those vitamins in with fat. So fat plays a role in allowing our body to absorb enough of those vitamins. It also helps protect our organs, and it provides insulation, helps our body stay warm enough in the cold weather. Our brain is made of fat, believe it or not. So fat is an extremely important nutrient that we want to make sure that we have consistently throughout the day. It's also something that helps keep us feeling full until the next meal. So some of the best fat sources are going to be plant-based fats, and we get those from our vegetable oils, our avocados, nuts and seeds, and you'll notice fish is on that list, but that's not plant-based. Fish is one of the exceptions where it's an animal-based food, but the type of fat that's in it is really, really good for our bodies. I'm going to touch briefly on saturated versus unsaturated fat. So when I said a minute ago that those foods were the best fat sources, saturated fat is something that we often get way too much of in the American diet. And when we've had a high intake of saturated fat for most of our lives, that's when you start to see it have an impact on our heart health later in life. And so I don't want people to see, again, we're trying to take off our black and white caps a little bit here. Don't see foods that are high in saturated fat as bad foods, but where we can, we want to try to fill in with the unsaturated fat sources, which are more plant-based, because they help balance that out and don't have that negative impact on our heart health down the road. So you'll see too on this list, it's kind of maybe hard to tell, fish is in both sides of this picture. So I just said a minute ago, fish is a great source of healthy fat. It also has some saturated fat in it too. Very few black and white, truly black and white things about nutrition. But yeah, like I said, high-fat dairy, high-fat meats, butter, sour cream, animal-based fats in general are going to be very rich in that saturated fat. So I encourage people, hey, rather than cooking with butter, do you think you could cook with vegetable or olive oil, just because it's more unsaturated fat? I want to transition into the micronutrients briefly. So these are the vitamins and minerals, and there are 4 that I want to cover. At your ages, your bones are developing, and it's really, really important to get enough calcium in so that you can achieve what we call peak bone mass. So up until 25 years of age, you are building, your body is building bone mass. After that age, it starts to decrease for the rest of your life. So you have until 25 to get those bones as dense as possible. And one of the ways you can do this is make sure that you're getting enough calcium in your diet. One of the best calcium sources that your body absorbs the best is from dairy. So unless you have a dairy allergy or you don't like dairy in any of its forms, I encourage young athletes to get as many as like 4 servings of dairy in a day, whether it's like milk with breakfast, cheese as part of a snack, or Greek yogurt at a meal at some point if you like Greek yogurt. I encourage Greek yogurt if you like it versus regular because it's a lot higher in protein. Calcium actually, so we always think of bones when we think of calcium, but it also plays a role in our body's ability to conduct nerve impulses, and even with muscle contraction, which is really important for our heart to beat properly and for our muscles to function properly too. You can get calcium from other sources, like your green leafy vegetables and beans and even fortified grains. You know, if you look on the cereal box, there's probably been calcium added to that just to help boost your intake. But in general, dairy is considered one of the best, most easily absorbed sources. Second one is vitamin D, and vitamin D and calcium actually work together as a team because vitamin D helps your body absorb calcium. And it also helps boost your immunity. It can help you recover from a hard workout and decrease inflammation. So it's really important to make sure you're getting enough of that in. And this is something that we really commonly see deficient, especially in this area because we spend part of the year with very limited sun exposure. And believe it or not, our body actually can make active vitamin D from just being in the sun. But when we're in the sun, a lot of times we are wearing sunscreen, and that prevents that too. So just because you spend a lot of time in the sun doesn't even mean that you're getting enough. So some of the ways that I encourage people to prevent themselves from getting deficient is to focus on making sure they get fatty fish like salmon, if you like that, or tuna in their diet. Cheese, egg yolks, even things like orange juice or milk have had vitamin D added to them, if you see that on the label. But when people are deficient in vitamin D, you often see like bone pain, repeated joint injuries, fatigue. And so if you're feeling any of that, it's helpful to get a vitamin D test to see if you're low. And at that point, I would recommend a supplement to boost those levels as soon as possible, because it's not helpful to be hanging in a vitamin D deficient state. So third of the 4 that I'm going to talk about is iron. And this one plays a role in your body's ability to use oxygen. So a lot of times when people are deficient in iron, they also feel tired. They might feel winded easily. They don't recover well. It actually plays a role in our bone health too. So sometimes if people are really low in iron, then they have issues with injury in their bones. But there's something called foot strike anemia. And for those of you who do a lot of running, you're at higher risk of this. Every time our foot hits the ground, red blood cells that are carrying iron through our body actually burst. on a microscopic level. And so we have a higher iron turnover when we do a lot of running. And so I see this a lot in my distance runners and more endurance-focused athletes, because our body isn't always great at absorbing iron, and we are not always great at even consuming enough iron. And when you pair that with a lot of training, it's very easy to become deficient, and it can cause a lot of issues. So that's another thing that we'll test too, if someone is struggling with fatigue or feeling winded really easily. There are a lot of things that cause those symptoms. But yeah, that's something that I'll look at. Animal sources of iron are the most easily absorbed, so I encourage that. But you can also get iron in from, again, that word fortified whole grains. If you look at the Cheerios box, it's going to say it has 100% your daily value of iron. And so those fortified products can be good sources too. But you can also get it from your green leafy vegetables and beans as well. Oh, I lied. Maybe I only have 3. Okay. All right. So we only have 3 that we're talking about today. I'm going to jump into how do we apply all of this information. And my professor in college loved this quote. People are always coming to me or us nutrition professionals asking, what should I eat? Tell me what to eat. And context is the key word, because it just depends on what you're doing and what your needs are and how you're feeling. What has your body been telling you? What foods do you like? What foods do you dislike? There are a lot of factors, and that's why nutrition can be done well in many different ways. Everyone's nutrition can look different. But everyday eating for well-being can actually look really different from eating around sport and training. I said earlier that simple sugar sources right before a workout are actually considered gold standard, the most effective. Because if you're going to eat something really complex before a workout, you're probably going to be feeling sick, or it won't be absorbed quickly enough for your body to use it, right? So you might actually find a dietitian recommending processed foods before a workout, which is a shock to a lot of people. But I'll tell you something. I have found that one of the best pre-workout snacks for me before I run is a Pop-Tart. And I know that sounds crazy, but this is how I prioritize things with nutrition. When we're putting our bodies under stress, which for you is growing, is school, is training, you're putting your body through a lot each day, we need to give our bodies enough energy. That is number one priority, because if we have an underfueled body, it has no choice but to break down. And we do that long enough, and we start to see that our health decreases, and we can't keep up with practices, and we're really tired, and different systems just don't work as well. So as a dietitian, my number one goal is that you get enough calories into your body at the end of the day. From there, I look at, okay, so how many of these calories are from protein versus carbs versus fat? Are we giving your body the proper balance of energy types? And then from there, I look at, all right, so how many of these foods are like really processed foods that have no fiber in them versus whole fruits and vegetables? Because we know that foods in their more whole form are going to offer our bodies more resources, more vitamins and minerals, more fiber, more balanced macronutrients. So I want to put that out there, that it's important to steward your bodies well and do the best you can with your food preferences and your budget and your time to try to get whole foods in your diet often, but realize it doesn't always have to be that way. It can actually be detrimental sometimes. Like I said, if we try to have whole grain or whole fruit or whole vegetable carbohydrate source right before a workout, probably going to have some cramping, bloating, nausea, and that's where I actually say, nope, we want rid of the fiber in that pre-workout snack. We want the processed food. We want the pretzels or the Pop-Tart or something more simple that our body is going to be able to use quickly for energy and not be held back by gut issues or different things like that. So that's why context is so important, because if I'm just looking at a day or a week, I try to push people toward whole food as often as possible, just so that they're getting the most nutrients they can. But near a workout, you'll find a dietitian recommending things like Pop-Tarts or jelly beans or gummy bears. I often say, hey, that's a perfect time for you to fit in your fun food for the day. So that just, the context or the what part of the day are we looking at plays a big role in what I would recommend to someone. A couple things that I look at are, when are we eating throughout the day? We talked a lot about the what, but we'll continue to talk about the what are we eating. And then the how much, which is probably the most gray area piece or variable piece between the three. But it's really important to start eating early. The majority of people I talk to don't eat breakfast. Or if they do, it's delayed or there's not much to it. And for those of you who don't have much appetite in the morning, I can assure you that just like your cardiovascular system adapts to training and your muscles get stronger when you strength train, your gut actually gets stronger when you feed it. And so if you're someone who's like, I just don't feel good when I eat in the morning, it doesn't work for me, if you find what I call a bridge food, something that is light and sounds semi-good to you in the morning, and just start with that, try to get that in within an hour or two of waking up. Wake your stomach up, give your body something to use for the day, and that process will get easier as your stomach gets better at processing food in the morning. But I really encourage people to try to eat within an hour or two of waking up most days of the week, if not all days. And then from there, it's really important to try to, I always kind of create this visual. You want to eat small amounts as often as possible throughout the day. Maybe anywhere from every 2 to 4 hours, trying to either have a snack or a meal so that you create rhythm in your eating patterns. Just like our body functions well with a consistent circadian rhythm in terms of sleep, it functions its best with a consistent rhythm of nutrient intake throughout the day. One thing I've heard from a lot of people in your age group is that it's challenging with a school schedule to eat consistently like this, and I get that. And you have to work with what the rules are. But where you can, sometimes students know that they have a certain teacher who's willing to let them have a snack in class, or they can work it out that they can try to keep their eating timing more consistent throughout the day. Like I said, it's maybe every 2 to 4 hours is a good goal for people. It's about just inching closer to what the recommendations are, not necessarily hitting them perfectly every time. Another thing that's important is everyone's body responds differently to different foods. And so it's important to kind of learn which foods make your body feel best. And when we're talking about eating around a game, or more so a game or a race, when your performance matters most, you really don't want to try something new before that. It's really important to throughout the week as you're practicing, be intentional about practicing with different foods at that time too, so that when it comes to meet day, race day, game day, you're practicing with things you know your body will respond well to. That's really important. And there's strength in variety. So I encourage people to have an open mind and be willing to try new foods, because our palates are constantly changing. Things that we didn't like when we were little, we actually find that they're our favorite foods as adults. It's a super interesting aspect to how our bodies work. But I always encourage people to try foods made in a different way, or just try to repeat exposure to them, so that you can have as much variety in your diet as possible, because each food offers different nutrients. So I want to talk about, how I had the hand portion guidelines with the macronutrients before? We're going to use those now. So on a day that you have a hard training session or a game, or maybe the meal before one of those, you really want to make sure that about half of your plate, or 2 fists at minimum, is carbohydrate focused. So in this example, you've got potatoes and bread functioning as the carbohydrate-rich foods. And then about 1 palm, maybe 2, especially like if you're doing a lot of strength training or trying to bulk up, 2 palms of protein. But in general, minimum of 1 palm of protein on your plate, or about 1/4 of your plate. And that vegetable section might be equivalent to about 1 fist. This is just a guide. You don't have to stick to it perfectly, but to give you a sense of around how many of these macros or macro food groups you might need at a meal, this is what I'm looking for. If you're adding fat to your plate, then fat is usually portioned out in like 1 to 3 thumbs, depending on what fat we're talking about. Maybe it's a different meal up here. Maybe you're gonna have toast with peanut butter on it. Peanut butter, I usually say like 2-ish thumbs is a good eyeball amount, but it all just depends on your goals and how hungry you are too, right? I don't like people to feel locked into these because this is a recommendation for like 3 meals a day. Plus, you might build in with snacks too. But it just depends, like, is your goal to gain weight, bulk up? Is your goal to cut weight, to lean out? Is your goal, do you have a really big event or a tournament coming up? That can adjust these different things. But in general, people will feel pretty good in terms of fullness on this amount of food using your hands, because our hands are proportional to what our bodies need usually for each of 3 meals throughout the day. Compare that to an easy training day. You can see that the carb and the veggies have flip-flopped. So now veggies take up half of the plate. And it's really just because our body doesn't use as many carbs on days that we aren't very active. So like I said, if you're the type of person who has a hard time getting enough food in and you're trying to gain weight, this plate really wouldn't apply to you at all. I don't really want you eating tons and tons of veggies because they make us feel full with very little energy. Veggies provide a lot of great things, vitamins and minerals and fiber, but like I said, energy intake is the number one important thing. So if you're someone who's struggling to get enough energy intake in, I don't want you throwing a ton of vegetables on your plate for that time. But yeah, in general, off days, we don't need as many carbohydrates. I see a hand. Oh, we gotta put you on the speaker.
Am I giving him a mic? No bars, just questions.
Would you say like condiments like ranch and stuff, is that bad?
It's not bad.
All right.
Nope, it's a condiment, right?
Yeah.
So like, sure, if you're gonna eat it as your
What
main
flavor
meal.
Pop-Tart do you eat like before you run?
Wait, say that again?
What flavor Pop-Tart do you eat before you run?
Pop-Tarts?
Yeah.
Right now, I've been on a cinnamon brown sugar.
Good
Yeah.
choice. That's a good choice. Do you eat both of them or just one?
That is a super good question. So, if we're going to throw numbers in here, it's recommended that you get this kind of plate about 3 to 4 hours before practice, and then another snack about 30 minutes before practice. That's 30 grams of carb. One Pop-Tart has 30 to 35 grams of carb. So I eat one because that perfectly follows those recommendations, and I feel really good on one. If I ate 2 30 minutes before a run, probably wouldn't feel so great. So it just depends. How much did you eat that day? How hungry are you? How long until your practice? If you're going to have a 2 to 3 hour practice and you didn't have a great lunch and you're going to go practice in an hour, you might want to eat 2.
So would you say like Rice Krispie and Cliff Bars, is that a good thing to eat before a practice?
Yeah, I would look at the carbs. So look at the carb count of any of the foods that you're thinking of and try to get in that ballpark of 30 grams of carb in the 30 minutes pre-workout. And see how your body feels. Cliff Bars are high in fiber, and they've got protein and fat. And all of those things, some people can do great with them, but protein, fat, and fiber can actually sit in your stomach longer, and before a workout, not great. But if it's a snack that you need to carry you 3 or 4 hours, we want protein, fat, and fiber, right? So that's a really good question.
What would you say is like the best post-workout like meal or thing?
So we focus on, man, I go into all this, so I love that you're thinking ahead and asking these questions. So combinations are very important. So the theme here is variety, combinations. I don't really like people to just go for one food. And that's what I usually go into with my snacking. I was going to see if I had a visual for this. So here's a list. With post-workout meals, at a meal, I like to see people try to get 3 to 5 food groups in. If it's a snack, I like to see them get 2 to 3, ideally that represent all 3 macronutrients. And so some of the snacks on this list show that. But for post-workout, it just depends on like how do you feel post-workout? Because if you were just out practicing football in the heat in August, you're really dehydrated and you feel nauseous and you don't want to eat, I'm going to tell that athlete, hey, you might want to go for some chocolate milk or a protein shake or a smoothie, something that's liquid, cold, a little bit lighter, but it still has multiple food groups and a lot of protein in it. But if you're getting done with basketball practice and you're like ready to go home and eat dinner, just do that. You try to get food in within an hour post-workout. If you know that you're not going to have access to a balanced meal within an hour, take a snack. That's whatever is convenient for you. It could be some energy bites. It could be a cheese stick and some pretzels. It could be a Greek yogurt. It could be protein shake or chocolate milk. So just move toward things that are that combination of protein and carb, especially post-workout. Good question. Do you have any others for me?
We can come back. I don't think so.
All right. I appreciate that.
Good job, thank you.
So, yeah, I think we need to clap for him. Got a brave soul with some great questions. So, that I will say that covers the majority of what I was going to cover. One more thing that I'll add is kind of to add what we started talking about. Generally, 3 to 4 hours before, you want a combination of all 3, carbs, fat, and protein, with an emphasis on carb, because that's what your body is mostly going to be burning during that workout. But as you get closer, you need to decrease the volume, otherwise you're going to have a lot of food sitting in your stomach. And also, we decrease protein and fat as we get closer. So while I do have some bullet point black and white recommendations, it varies depending on when you have access to food, right? And your school schedule and everything. But a couple of things you want to actually avoid in the few hours before a workout are foods that are spicy, foods that are really high in fat or fiber, because spice just tends to make our stomach a little more sensitive, and fat and fiber make food sit in our stomach longer, which, like I said, that's great for satiety. If you aren't going to have access to another meal or snack for 4 hours, you want some fat and fiber in your stomach because it'll keep you feeling full longer. But if you're about to go run around, we don't want that. So that's where we'll gravitate toward the processed carb foods, so that they pass through your stomach quickly and they're ready to be used. This just kind of adds to that list. Whole grains, high fiber foods, veggies. We want to try to decrease in the few hours leading up to a practice session. But it just depends. I've talked to athletes who can literally eat anything right before and they don't have issues. And then other people feel like they can't eat for hours leading into it. And they still struggle with gut issues. So, yeah, and like I said, this kind of just super simplified version of what I said with the hand portion guidelines. But like a good pre-workout meal could be a bagel with peanut butter and fruit. How far in advance you eat this depends on your stomach. Some people could eat this 30 minutes before and be fine. Others need to eat this more like 2 hours before, because it's got some fat in it and some fiber with the fruit. But yeah, just like I said before, the combinations are really important. I'm going to touch on hydration briefly, and then we'll open it up for questions and wrap up. So hydration is also very individual. And so a lot of times when I'm working one-on-one with people, we'll do sweat testing or just try to get a sense of what kind of sweater they are to try to more closely match their needs. But in general, I encourage people to try to start with anywhere from like 2 to 3 cups of fluid in the 2 to 3 hours prior to exercise. And then if they're working out for an hour, you can get away with just having water. But if your practices are longer than an hour or they're super intense or they're in the heat, I really like to see athletes drinking a sports drink of some kind like Gatorade or Powerade, or there are a ton of different products out there. But think about what you're using during a training session. You're sweating, so you're losing water and electrolytes, and you're burning carb at a crazy rate. Sports drinks provide all 3 of those things. So they help keep you above that red line where you start to tank that much more than water will by itself. You'll notice that this says recover with 16 to 24 ounces for every pound lost. That is actually referring to, if we do a sweat test, we'll weigh the athlete before a workout, they'll go do a workout, and we'll weigh them after, and we can do a calculation that guesses or estimates about how many ounces of fluid per hour their body sweats. And so you're only going to know that, obviously, if you're weighing yourself before and after the workout, which isn't for everyone. Got another question here.
As a wrestler, we have very intense practices, and like, is it bad to lose like six pounds at a single practice?
So, yes, that's a really good question. We usually encourage people to try to avoid more than 2% of their body weight lost. And math is not my strong suit, so I couldn't whip out an example, but without calculating it. But yeah, 6 pounds is pretty significant. But if you take your body weight and determine what 2% of that is, you would want to try to avoid losing that much or more during a practice. That's a really good question.
Yeah, so say like as a wrestler and you got to lose that weight, but you still need water, what do? Do you like supplement the water slowly in or what?
Yeah, so wrestling is, you guys are tough. That's a tough sport for that. There are a couple strategies around that I could actually send to Sheila to send to you guys. But it is kind of timing everything around when you're going to be getting weighed, because it's really not good to be working out and competing highly dehydrated. But at the same time, you need to make weight. So you want to, all of the strategies kind of center around when are you going to be weighed. But yeah, like I said, I can send more to Sheila to forward you, because that's a unique situation.
And then after like losing that much weight and then weighing in, and is
Yeah.
it like bad to like just gulp down a bunch of food?
So your body's wanting that, right?
Yeah.
But what that creates is almost a bit of a binge, and it's not a great habit to get into. And so that's why it's a tricky balance of timing, so that you kind of dehydrate yourself more or less going into that weigh-in, and then you need to replenish everything pretty quickly to get your body ready to go after that. So where I can, I try to set people up to avoid that binge type mentality as much as possible, but sometimes you've got to get it in your body, so you have to do what you have to do. Really good questions, you guys. One more thing I'm going to say, and then I'll wrap up and officially open it up for questions, is just, this is more of like an everyday well-being type thing. Our body is over 60% water, and so it regulates a lot of different functions. And a few of the first things that happen when we're dehydrated are that we feel tired, we have a headache, we just feel foggy, our performance suffers. So one of the best things we can do when we're feeling like that is to start drinking more water and see what happens. It can be a very simple fix like that. And water doesn't have to be, just drinking water doesn't have to be your only approach. Fruits and vegetables have a lot of water in them. Things like tea, not necessarily sweet tea, but like herbal tea, seltzer water, juices, broth-based soups. You can get fluid in those ways too. So be creative, but one of the best ways, just so our taste buds adapt to what we feed them. And if we start drinking more water, it doesn't necessarily feel great at first, but our bodies adapt and we start to crave more water as we drink more water. So my strategy is to always have a water bottle with me and have a water bottle that has features you like. Put stickers on it if you like that. I love this one because it can literally ride everywhere on my pinky. It's an extension of my body. And it also has a dump feature and a straw. So research actually shows that when we have access to a straw, we tend to drink more. And so one of the easiest strategies is just having that in front of you. And I know that there are rules at school that make that tricky sometimes, but where you can, the availability, the accessibility of it can be one of the biggest factors in helping us overcome that. All right. Thanks for hanging on. We talked about a lot of things today. So I'm going to officially open it up for questions. I see some hands in the back.
All right, so right now if I eat like 3 meals a day, and you said that it's good to try to eat 5 to 6 meals a day, what's the difference of like the glucose and insulin response in my body?
So like I said earlier, you want to try to create this dynamic. And when that often looks like that at eating around 5 or 6 times a day. So that could be breakfast, lunch, and dinner as our 3 foundational meals. But, okay, so we eat breakfast at 7 a.m. A lot of you probably eat it earlier if you're getting, on the way to school. 7 a.m., lunch at noon, and dinner at 6. I said that you want to try to eat every 2 to 4 hours throughout the day. Oftentimes when we consistently go more than 5 hours between any type of meal, we really dip into the red metabolically. And so in an effort to create this dynamic, if you're eating at 7, I'd like to see you eating something 2 to 4 hours later, because 7 to noon is 5 hours, and noon to 6 is 6 hours. So there's a big gap there. And then even from 6 p.m. to whenever you go to bed, there could be a really big gap too. So I really like to see people filling in with those small snacks that it might be 2 food groups, like peanut butter crackers, mid-morning snack, or maybe around 10 a.m. to kind of fill in that gap between breakfast and lunch. The goal is to avoid ravenous hunger, because that makes, at that point, like you're really in the red from an energy standpoint too. So to your question about like your blood sugar response, you just have higher highs because you tend, when you do have the chance to eat, you're probably eating more. Higher highs, lower lows. We want to try to create a rhythm that keeps us in that sweet spot from an energy standpoint throughout the day. It's a really good question because I didn't get around to clarifying that 3 meals versus 5 to 6 times of eating a day. But yeah, it could be mid-morning snack, mid-afternoon snack before practice, and then even a post-practice like evening snack before bed. Because you also don't want to go to bed hungry. You want to try to, if dinner is more than 3 hours before bed, you want to try to actually fill in with a snack about an hour before you go to bed, because that can help improve your sleep. And a dairy-based snack like some milk or a smoothie or a yogurt parfait or something can actually help improve your sleep. It's also considered gold standard in terms of protein, because dairy protein is absorbed really slowly. So having a dairy source an hour before you go to sleep and you're recovering all night and not eating all night, it provides your body with a slow feed of protein while you're sleeping and recovering? So that was a really good question. Does anyone have any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands.
I don't understand your question. You're going to open this door and you're going to send a kid. And keep the door open and send a kid with the kid.
I think sports drinks are just like a one-stop shop, but athletes tend to sweat anywhere from 300 milligrams of sodium an hour to up to like 2,000 milligrams of sodium an hour. And so for an athlete who's really, I generally encourage people to aim for 300 to 500 milligrams of sodium an hour. And if they're struggling with fatigue or cramping or anything like that, we might look a little more closely at their needs and see if they need a higher amount. And at that point, you might add salt tabs in, like just to make up for that discrepancy. That's a good question, though. Any others? Oh, I see a hand.
What juice would you recommend for like while eating or like pre-game, like workout or anything?
Okay. So do you like juice before a workout? Really anything goes. It's one of those things where juice goes straight in your bloodstream. It's a simple sugar. And so I'd recommend that you're having it pretty close to the workout, because if you have a simple sugar like an hour before a workout, it's going to cause a spike and a crash before you even start. And so that's something you might drink like 10 to 15 minutes before you start. If you're having it before that, that's where I'd actually pair it with something else, like peanut butter crackers and some juice or something like that. But you kind of have to read how your stomach responds to it. In terms of what kind of juice, whatever kind you like, yeah, they're mostly the same as far as sugar content goes. If you notice that you drink it closer to a workout and you feel like cramping or anything, that would be a sign to change something up. Good question, though.
So we want to be considerate of everyone's time. I really appreciate you all coming out today. I have just one more, maybe in summary question. A lot of the things you said, and you've used the term like read your stomach, and a lot of this for their journey, you've got different pockets of teams, in season, out of season, bulk up, cut weight. They're all on their individual journey, and as young adults, I think one of the things that's really important is that they continue to look for resources. So this is a presentation. They're not going to walk out of here as an expert on their body. Can you give them just some tips, some advice for how to read that? How to read their energy level, because a Pop-Tart may work great for you. It may not work for someone else. They may have lunch at different times of the day. It may be more like breakfast. So there are some variables that they can control, variables that they can't. So as they continue on this journey as athletes and young adults, can you give them a sense, because obviously your education has informed your decision, but prior to that, you were walking the path where you were figuring out for yourself. So from that perspective, can you kind of give them some direction on where to go from here?
Yeah, I think the three key things are that just building a foundation on the timing, because science has shown pretty substantially that an early meal within 1 to 2 hours of waking up, and that consistent as you can each day, trying not to go more than 4 or 5 hours in between times of eating throughout the day, really contributes to energy level. And then pairing multiple, like I showed you that balanced plate, or pairing snacks together that have a combination of all three macronutrients, whether it's an apple or banana with peanut butter, or cheese and crackers, or a Greek yogurt parfait, or you name it, that combination of types of energy. Carbohydrates are that very quickly available energy source, and fat and protein last longer in your system. So pairing all three of those together provide that perfect balance of quickly improving your energy level and then keeping it up until your next meal. And then I gave you the ballpark amounts, portion sizes, but you really have to listen to your body and rate, like, what is a comfortable level of fullness for me? You can trust that if you're combining food groups and you're eating pretty consistently throughout the day, that you're really not going to dive into that red level of hunger very often. But the timing aspects and the combining different food groups are some of the most foundational pieces to this, and kind of adjusting as you go. But question yourself on, like, what is comfortable fullness? And if you're struggling with meals, walking away feeling excessively full on a consistent basis, it's important to kind of slow down at that meal and focus in on eating, because it takes us 20 minutes to feel full after we start eating. But if we're eating really fast and we're really distracted because we're multitasking, we can't really tune into those things that our body's telling us as well. So sometimes it is just cutting back, removing the screens, removing the homework, whatever it is, and just noticing how your body feels as you eat that meal, that will help guide you to feel what is comfortable fullness, knowing that, hey, if I'm comfortably full now, when I feel hungry later, I can go back and respond to that at that point. So it is a gray area thing that kind of takes sitting down and talking one-on-one through the dynamics of your life and what you're feeling and stuff like that. But in general, those are some of the key principles to that.
Thank you, McKenna, for coming out and talking with our student athletes today. Can we give her a big round of applause? If you guys have any individual questions, or you think personally you would like to speak with a new sports nutritionist, McKenna does have office hours here in Lidditz on Thursdays at LGH Sports Medicine. So if you would have any interest, please get in contact with me and I can set you up with her.